All right, gang, welcome back to another episode of Wrestling with Your Calling with Dr. Conrad. Today's guest is a friend of mine, Tom Donkin. He's a local community member, lawyer, and friend. And so wanted to thank you, Tom, for being on with us today.
I'm glad to be here, Dr. Conrad.
Yay. Well, Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell a little bit about your story, what's your background, your profession, what do you do? Share as much as you're comfortable.
Well, I'm pretty old, so I've got a long story, but I'll try to keep it brief. Uh, I'm originally from Michigan, and I actually accepted Jesus' salvation a long time ago, back in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when I was about 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I was feeling like I also needed to go into the ministry in some capacity. But I started to do so, and I first of all met some resistance from the people that I loved going in that direction. Didn't realize that I didn't realize the support that I thought I'd get. And back then, I was really anxious to get people's support. It was very, very important to me. It's something that took a long time to work out. And then, and Conrad, this is what really struck me with your book. And I should say, by the way, as a note, I haven't finished your book yet because I had to go back and restart it. I got about maybe a quarter of the way through, and I realized this is not something I can just read. This is something I'm really going to have to work through slowly.
Mm.
And so I did. I went back and restarted it, and I'm getting back through it now and taking lots of notes and going through and just working through a lot of issues, and it's been a
Mm.
real blessing for me in that sense. You, of course, focus on Moses and his story, and that's something, of course, that anyone who's been in Sunday school as a kid, they've heard of Moses and rescuing the Israelites from slavery. But the first portion of Moses's life is something which you address in great detail, and it's something which I think is not addressed enough. And it certainly rung a bell in my life. And that's Moses, of course, getting God's calling. And it's interesting because when he first starts to act to rescue the Israelites, he, of course, has been born a Hebrew, rescued from death, raised an Egyptian, and he's part of the Egyptian royal family. But he goes out, and you don't hear anything about God's voice
Mm-hmm.
calling him to what we now know was his mission in life, which was bringing the Israelites out of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
You don't hear anything about it, but he starts to act on his own. And in looking back, I think that's exactly what I did. Is
Mm.
except, I thought I heard God's voice calling me, and I think I did. But instead of waiting for God and listening for Him to give me directions, I just went out and started acting on my own.
Mm.
And I think that what happened with Moses, again, I just realized the similarities with me. When you start acting on your own, of course, you're really acting, at least partially. You might think that you might use God's calling as a pretext, but you're acting out of your own motivations, your
Yeah.
own goals are there. And I started doing that. And like Moses, I had just tragic results, horrific
Mm.
results that left me with serious spiritual wounds, you could say, and sort of a trail of a devastated and kind of halted and unproductive life that lasted for decades.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's a life which is pretty common in the United States with divorce and all sorts of problems there. And it really took me a long time to realize and to accept that the fault was mine, so to speak. That yes, God did love me and He had called me for a purpose, but I had gone out and decided to do it on my own for my own merit.
Yeah.
And it gets back to what I think I said at the beginning of this diatribe. I did it because I wanted people's approval. And
Mm.
you see Moses down there, and he goes and he kills the Egyptian, and then he goes and he tries to settle the dispute, and he's just absolutely shocked because he doesn't get the Israelites' approval. They turn on him, say, "What are you doing down here? You've created nothing but trouble for us. Now you're going to lord it over us." And so, of course, then he runs off.
Yeah.
And that really struck me. And that's after going through that, I continued to read the book for a while, and then I realized I've got a lot of issues I need to work through here, and so I'm going to go back and I'm going to use it more as a study, and that's what I've been doing, and I think I've gotten about a third of the way through it now.
Wow. It's powerful, Tom, just to hear you just connect. I've
Mm-hmm.
been using Moses. I've been using the term that Moses is my mentor now
Mm-hmm.
because his life, I always think about the impact of his life that's affected so many people, so many cultures, generations, the Hebrew people, and how
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the reasons why I use him as the character study of this. And so I appreciate
Mm-hmm.
you sharing that. In your story, you were talking about how there's this desire for ministry, feeling like ministry was kind of the direction and various things happen. Do you feel that that desire is still there in this phase of your life now that you're a lawyer in the community, married with children? Do you feel like that's that hunger inside of you has not left you from what was once years ago of a journey?
That's a really good point, and the thing about it is I would say that the desire to do it is still there, but it's kind of like when you've stuck your hand in a fire, you don't really feel like sticking it back in. And again, Moses certainly as the mentor and as the example I see a lot of similarities there. Moses, when he sees the burning bush, he of course is very attracted to it, and he goes to it. He wants to see what's going on, and he hears God's voice, and he never denies God's calling in that conversation that he has with him. But he keeps saying, I'm just not capable of doing this, God.
Mhm,
And that's the kind of the phase I find myself in now. That's a
mhm,
hard phase to get out of. I mean, God gets frustrated with Moses there in the end. He says, "Look, but I don't forget, by the way, who I am. I'm God, right? I'm listening. I'm present. We're not really worried about what you have." And I think it's that last vestige of when the breaking away, the initial breaking away, and trying to go out and do this on your own.
mhm.
Well, you think, hey, I've got what it takes, and people are going to like me. It's a self focus, and
Mhm.
Moses, he's got the same self focus there. But of course, since he has had such tragic results when he tried to do it on his own, his self focus is now turned from his perceived strengths to his perceived weaknesses, and
Mm.
that's a huge struggle to get out of. And I wonder too. I've wondered several times in going through it, how many other people are out there that maybe have gone through the same process,
Mhm.
and now realizing, I just needed to have that time in
Mhm.
order to mature in God's love enough to be able to listen to Him. But now they're afraid to really step out because I've made such terrible mistakes in the past. What am I going to do now? That's
Yeah.
kind of where I find myself now. I kept trying to get back on track there. I kept trying. For instance, uh, in my first marriage, which just to put it kindly, was not conducive to ministry work. I
Mhm.
kept trying to get down here and get into seminary and get through that so I could pursue some sort of full time ministry, and it never worked out. It
Yeah.
was I was always stopped in some way. You wonder how many times Moses, while he was out there for decades, just shepherding the sheep, kept looking back at Egypt and wondering, is there some way I can get back there and do that? So
Mhm.
I mean, it's speculation, but you wonder what was going through his heart during that time.
Yeah.
And at the same time, being afraid to even try, and being afraid to even to really acknowledge that maybe God wanted him to take that path.
Mhm. That's powerful. And as you know, and you've seen in the book, there's these four phases of sort of has been organized into where there's the calling phase, which I believe is just God starts giving us pieces of the story. There's our moments, these moments of encounter with God. Then there's this wrestle phase, and then
Mhm.
there's the potential. What I hear from you is that there's that wrestle phase at the bush, burning bush, where those these five responses to God, and God has grabbed your attention. You noticing that the bush is burning, you're baited off the path a bit, and then now here's this wrestle that says, "My identity, who am I?" Or this wrestle of "Who are you?" Or this wrestle of, "Will the people listen to me?" The wrestle of "What about my
Mhm.
stuff, my problems?" And the wrestle of will to say, "I don't need, do I want to
Mhm.
do this?" So it sounded a little bit like there's this place where the Lord may very well be saying, "Hey, there's some things I have for you, and I want you to step back out again or go back to that maybe painful place of past. Um, am I right in what I'm hearing from you? Is that do you feel
That's
like you're just at that cusp of saying I'm at a burning bush and the Lord is dealing with those things in my heart?
yes, I think that's exactly where I find myself right now. Is again having sort of had a long time here to if you get some distance between yourself and the pain of the past, and you have some time to think about it, and you don't want to say no, but you're focused in on sort of the ills that you've already done, and you wonder if you can ever come back from that. So it is a wrestling, and the thing of it is, it's amazing God's love, because he sits and says, I love you no matter what, and no matter what you've done, and no matter what your weaknesses and your strengths are. I know all about this. Again, I am God, and I know this, and I love you infinitely, and I know all about you, and I know exactly where you're going to need me to support you, and I've given you the tools to do this, and it's just a matter of obedience in a way.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
he's so patient with us. He's so very patient. I think he's been very patient with me. And the one thing I think that's tough is, I think it's a lot of times I think that people will wonder, well, why are these bad things, why are they allowed to happen?
Hmm.
And during some of my darkest moments in the past, I think, God, why didn't you just stop me from making that terrible decision
Hmm.
and causing such horrible pain and destruction to myself and others? And and if you think about it, it's like God knows what you need,
Hmm.
and he doesn't want you to be a robot. He's not going to sit there and he doesn't want you to be a robot. People have heard that before, but he doesn't want you to be an infant either. And
Hmm.
infants have to fall down, and sometimes they got to fall down in such a way that it hurts, and it's a parent sort of walking behind their toddling child and making sure they don't fall down the stairs and seriously hurt themselves. But still, you've got to learn to walk, and you've got to learn to be able to go and to trust that God has given you what you need to walk forward.
Hmm.
And I feel better knowing that in the company of Moses, on this aspect at least, it took me decades to realize that.
Hmm.
And that God is so patient with us, and that his will is perfect. And it's so perfect that it encompasses our imperfections. And while he's working his will, he works our imperfections out simultaneously in a way.
That's
So,
powerful. That is powerful. I'm stirred. I'm literally, I've got cold chills listening to you talk because I believe there's such a power in your story that I think a lot of people need to hear. I'm encouraged by it. That there's something there that when we sometimes read the Bible, it's almost like they're mythical stories. They're distant from us. These are not real humans. They're just, caricatures that God used to tell us, again, a mythical story. But to hear you parallel your life with it, and that's kind of what happened to me too. I just saw these phases and these details and these themes, and that's kind of my heart of this wrestling with your calling is to create a framework to help people to start to see that wrestle. Thank you for sharing what you just shared. One thought that came to mind when you were one of the first people to kind of use this term overwhelmed, and you gave me some new insight today to say that you started reading the book a certain way, realized that you can't read it that way. You've got to read it slower. Um, would you mind taking me back to a conversation we had in the past that you said when you first started reading the book, especially about this story is not your own portion, and you said
mhm.
you were overwhelmed. And I remember you started giving me more detail there. Would you mind sharing bits and pieces of what you remember from that and why you were overwhelmed when you first started reading the book?
Yeah, it's at the very beginning of the book, of course, and I think it's in the context chapter, I believe. And you start out, and it's a bucket of ice water, really, over the head in a way, in a good sense. I like ice water. I say that positively, but it kind of shocks you, especially because in our modern age, so much of what's going on, at least in our country and in our culture, has to do with people saying, well, what do I think I'm supposed to be? Am I supposed
Mhm.
to be this? Am I supposed to be that? And sort of deciding what they're supposed to be. And you bring back the reality, and I think really sort of bring color to the reality that no, it's not what we think we're going to make of ourselves. This is a story that God has made.
Mm,
God, the creator of the universe, has made this story. We are characters in the story that he's made. He's created us and put
hmm
us in this story. And through things that we shouldn't even try to understand, we are created to be in his story, and yet we have free will. That he's just done that. We can make our own decisions, and his story goes on with our decisions.
yeah.
And it just takes the onus off of us and out of, well, should I be this or should I be, a lot of it's professional. People, well, what do you want to be when you grow up is the big question. Do you want to be
hmm
a doctor, or or hopefully not a lawyer or something of that nature? Do you want to go into a certain, and that's what you are. You hear people when they're on interviews like this. Well, I'm Tom Donkin, and I'm an insurance defense attorney. No, I'm not an insurance defense attorney. Now that's what I do for a living,
Yes. Yes.
and that's what I do. And God has put me there. There's no doubt about it. He's blessed me with that profession, but that's not really who I am.
Mm,
I am what God has made me. I am his child, and he has made me, and he has put me here in this planet, in this existence that we're in right now. That's who we are, not the things around us, not the physical characteristics that we have, not our professions or our status and families and things. That's who we really are.
yeah.
And if you start from that, if you start from that sort of foundation, and then you look at, well, what is your calling? Again, it makes it so that I am looking at this, and what is the environment that God has put me in? Where has he put me? And of course, environmental factors put so much into it. I mean, if depending upon what your parents are, there's no doubt that's going to affect what you are when you grow up, in the sense of
Mhm.
the choices you make and the directions you take. But ultimately, God has put you there.
Yeah. That's
And I think that's the key. It's not, well, what do I make of myself? It's, no, where has God put me?
yeah.
And what is he calling me to do in this place that he's put me?
That's excellent, Tom, because that does it does change perspective. Because I
Mm-hmm.
and know, yeah, I've got, of course, people have heard my story from some previous episodes and other things, and when I think about what you're saying, I think that's what's released me in this journey I'm on.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you know what, Lord, if you can tell the story of currently 8 billion people and then past the billions of people, you have enough credibility. You've got enough street credibility to keep people through their story. All the historical figures we know, all there is a story told that it wasn't really their choice. They didn't choose their family dynamics, where they're born, on and on. So I love what you're saying, because I think it does release us from there's pressure. There's pressure that I think comes when we try to figure out our own. So man, there's so much to ask, but there's because I've loved your story. One reason why I've invited you to be on. If you were thinking about someone who may pick up this book, or and because my goal is to say, hey, world, I want to give you a framework so that we can have a perspective shift. It's not, I'm just like you said, being obedient earlier. I'm just wanting to be obedient to share something that was out of my personal quiet time with the Lord that I received. I started writing about it, and now I'm sharing it with the world. But like, if you were to think about your story, your journeys, the stuff you're learning from the book, what kind of encouragement would you give to a person listening right now? You've done that a little bit already, but if you were to kind of think through and take whatever first few things that come to mind, um, speak to that person who's saying, you know what, Tom, I can relate. I've gone on this journey and I feel like things aren't working out. I've had
Mm-hmm.
chaos come against me, whether it's family dynamics. I thought this was the direction, but it's not the direction. Or it's that person that is that where you are now. Like, I feel like I need to make some changes, but those changes, they're scary. I've got to go back to Egypt, quote unquote. And you're telling me to go do things that I ran from that I don't want to go do again. Just love to hear your encouragement for those that may be listening. And again, I trust the Holy Spirit will speak through your heart in your way, but I'd love to hear some of your pastoral encouragement for those that may be listening.
Well, I think there's two things that come to mind. And the first is what we were just talking about. You have to remember that God has put you, no matter where you are, God has put you in that particular moment, in that particular place for a reason. His purpose is being accomplished through you. And if you love the Lord, that should always give you comfort. It
Hmm.
should, no matter what mistake you may have just made, no matter what, sort of damages now that you are going through because of something that's happened to you or something that you've done. I think for me, that's the thing that bothers me most is it's like, well, how could I have made these incredibly destructive decisions, not sort of catastrophes that have come upon me, that have happened because of things beyond my control.
Hmm.
Again, like Moses, Moses goes out there, and what's the first two acts of his ministry? Well, he kills somebody. He's the first act of his ministry. That's probably not the way God intended that to go. So that's God's probably up there thinking, I really hadn't thought of it that way, Moses. No, that's not what I planned. Another thing, and I think this is strangely comforting if you think about it. Don't try to ask yourself what might have been.
Hmm.
It's something actually, if anyone who's ever read the Narnia books, every now and then Aslan says that, and I forget which book. I think it's several times. We can't ever ask ourselves what might have been when one of the other characters in the Narnia book has sinned against him in some way and gone off on their own, and they're repentant, and they say, well, what would have been like if I hadn't have done that? You
Hmm.
can't ask that. You'll never know. And maybe in some sort of way that only God understands, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. You made your
Hmm.
mistake. You did your thing, but God's purpose is never defeated. We can't defeat his purpose no matter what we do.
Yeah.
you
Wow.
know and and if you want sort of recently I heard this analogy in a different Bible study. If you want just a tremendous example of that, think about Adolf Hitler. I mean, he tried to exterminate the Jews.
Hmm.
What was the result of his attempt to exterminate the Jews? Certainly a tremendous amount of pain and suffering and death, but the result was the nation of Israel.
Hmm.
That's
Wow.
that's what it didn't happen until after Hitler tried to exterminate all the Jews, and then after that, shortly thereafter, within 3 years of World War II, the nation of Israel was founded. You
Wow.
can't stop God. You can't
Wow.
thwart His purposes in any ways, no matter what you do, and that should be comforting. The other thing that I think should be comforting is I struggled a lot because I'm older now. I'm 58, and I really made a lot of my mistakes, the most serious mistakes, when I was in my early 20s.
Hmm.
And I think all that lost time. I sometimes I beat myself up. I lost decades and decades because I made those mistakes and I got off on the wrong track and I couldn't get around to even see where the right track was.
Hmm.
But then look at Moses. He makes his mistakes, and then he's out, in the wilderness for decades. He's out there,
Hmm.
and I think the thing is that it was important to God. It was important for Moses that he spend that time out there shepherding those sheep.
Hmm.
And in each of our lives, that time is not wasted. God uses that time. You might not know ever how he used it, but he uses that time to just continually turn you back to him and continually bring you
Hmm.
closer to him.
Hmm.
And because of the way we are, it takes decades, but decades are nothing compared to eternity.
Yeah.
So
That's powerful, bro. Man, I'm so glad that I asked you to join me in this conversation because I mean, your life and you having time to really experience life has really, I'm stirred this morning. I'm so encouraged because yeah, in my short 42 years, I'm saying to myself, I've had my Moses moment, but to see how you're saying now, here I am in my third to fourth quarter of life for your case, and you're saying, yeah, I
mhm,
noticed like that decades of pain of
mhm,
having to work through stuff, but yet still there's something I'm perceiving. There's something still in you that says, yeah, there's God still has something for me, and I'm okay. And but you're at that burning bush wrestle, and I've always believed for you, and we've talked about it. I'm not going to bring it up much here, but just believing that the great things that you've got to come, there's still life left in you, and that's one thing I've always been admired by your world. I still feel the life, almost like this Caleb Edge. He's 83 years old, and he's like, "Look, I'm still as strong as I was when I was back in my back in my earlier, and so I feel like there's still life in you, and I'm excited about what the Lord is going to do. And potentially in the future, once things start to shift, and if I'm still doing this podcast, love to hear about the shifts and bring you back on for those things, and hear the updates to your story. Um, I would like for us as we're closing, would like if you're willing just to pray for those that are listening, and however you feel led to pray. Don't feel like you have to pray for 5-10 minutes. Just short prayer as whatever you feel comfortable, and then we'll sort of end this time, and hopefully as things shift in the future, love to bring you back on and see what updates are there and go from there.
Well, thank you, Conrad. I appreciate it. And sure, maybe once I finish the book, I can come back on. I'm sure there's more there. So
Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be
no
great.
doubt about that.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, Father, I'm just so thankful for this time with Conrad, and I'm so thankful for the way that you have blessed me with his book that he's written and continue to bless me. And Father, you know my heart, and you know how much of a healing this has brought to me, and how it is to see this and to look back and to realize, all of those things, even the things I did, I can't escape your will, Father. And even the things I did that I know were absolutely wrong, Father, you've turned them to good. And I just pray that you would just let anyone else out there, let all who hear this, Father, know that you love them and that you never, ever give up on them,
Hmm.
and that you are using everything in their lives to their good and to their blessing. That's in many prayers that's said, but Father, to really feel it and to believe it is such a tremendous blessing. And I pray that blessing upon the audience for this podcast. I pray, Father, that they would come to you out of love and look back and give themselves forgiveness and realize the forgiveness you give them for any mistakes made, and realize that there's always time, there's always more time, and you always have a purpose for us, Father. You've had a purpose for us from before we were born, and you have a purpose for all of our days. I pray that you would bless them with that, Father, and bring them comfort and healing. And I pray these things in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen. Well, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I appreciate your time today.
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's great. Let me